Hey, welcome to the first lesson of Module 5 in the Ultimate ZRrush Guide course. This module is all about retopologizing and start polishing all the shapes that we have. So I'm going to walk you through the entire process, but so far what we have is a pretty decent sketch, a pretty good block out of the character. We've done a very good progress so far, but everything is very sketchy, right? There are some pieces that are clean, but the whole point of this lesson and the following lessons of this module is to get the rest of the pieces and the entire character to a point that it has a pretty decent topology. We can preserve all the details and all that. I'm going to show you how, so that we can start adding even more details and get into custom brushes, alphas, that sort of thing, right? So don't worry, I'm going to walk you through the entire thing. Everything is step by step. Try to follow this systematic approach and hopefully you will get definitely something good out of it. All right, so let's go ahead and start with this. I'm going to jump into the full screen. And here we have the last character, or the last stage of this character that we created in the previous module. So as I said in the bonus module, just in case you didn't watch the bonus lesson of last module, I went ahead and tweaked all of the pieces that we created with panel loops and all that in the left hand of the character. But now we're going to focus on polishing some of the pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and enable polyframe first, and I'm going to select something like the handbag. Okay, I'm going to also go into solo mode. So this one, as it is pretty decent topology, right? This one is what I would consider a clean mesh that we can go ahead and start detailing. Now, the only thing that I would do probably is make sure that the spacing between these polygons is a little bit more consistent. So during this stage of cleaning up the topology, I would probably add another loop in that area. Let me just bring in my Epic pen. So like I said, this is a pretty clean topology. It's not super heavy. So I would just add another set of loops there so that all of these polygons are more consistent in size. All right, that is the approach that I will take. But just wanted to show you that this is what I would consider a clean piece that we can start, using the subdivision approach and start detailing and all that. Now, if we compare that with something like this one, it looks all right, but this will present a big issue for us. So all of this geometry here, there's a lot of triangles and weird topology here, and what we're going to aim to do in this module is to clean this up so that we end up with something that's more of this type of clean topology, right? Quads all around. And for that, we're going to use an automated tool called the ZRmesher, which I'm sure you're familiar with this, or at least you have heard of it. But if not, don't worry. I'm going to walk you through the entire process. I'm going to show you the different options that we have, how you can use these, and how you can leverage the potential of this tool and other tools combined with this ZRmesher, because it's one of the best tools in ZRush, especially to clean things up and make sure that the topology is clean. By the way, that's a fairly automated tool, so we don't have to spend too much time in the technical aspect of it. All right, so let me get out of solo mode, and we're going to concentrate in this lesson. I'm going to give you an introduction to ZRmesher, so we're going to concentrate on some simple pieces. So we're going to remesh this part here as well as the one at the back. We're going to remesh this bit as well, and the shirt. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and 4 elements. So these 3 elements here are relatively simple. So these ones won't take too long, and it will give you a good sense of what the ZRmesher can do. And then we have the shirt that is slightly more complex, but it's still relatively simple for ZRush to come up with a better topology. So you'll see here this type of stars, these points here. These, they're not bad, but ideally you want to place these ones in strategic places that you won't be able to see it much. So something like this point, I would potentially put it here under the armpit if you need to, but not here. So this is the type of things that hopefully ZRmesher can help us to sort out. But again, I'm going to walk you through the entire thing. We're going to get to that. All right. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to do the first thing that we usually do, which is load a custom UI. So I'm going to go to Preferences, Config, Load UI, and this time I'm going to select the ZRmesher Module 5 Lesson 1. So I'm going to click Open, and there we go. So let me show you what I have done here. Pretty simple. I haven't moved things too much. I just added, these are the tools for the ZRmesher, and this is the main button of the ZRmesher that we're going to use. I'm going to walk you through all of these settings, and I also added this bit here, which is a very rough introduction to the tools that we can use for poly painting. And I'm going to show you why I want to introduce you to these points at this stage of the process. All right, but those are the two main things that I added to the UI. The rest remains the same. So the way that ZRmesher works is ZR is going to take whatever element. I'm going to start with this one right here. I'm going to go into solo mode so that it's easy for you to see what I'm doing. ZR is going to evaluate this topology, right? And it's going to come up with a better topology maintaining the volume. So without doing anything, this is the default settings. I'm going to click ZRmesher, just this button here. And this is what we have. So far, the topology is much better. Obviously, we have more points, and the polygons themselves are a little bit smaller, but they're very, very consistent, and the shape and the volume is being kept, right? But this is a much better topology that we can start adding details to it. And there's just a one single click, right? One ZRmesher goes from this to, goes from this to this. Okay, and this is another great thing about the ZRmesher. We can just, if you don't like this one, you can just go back in time or just do undo and do another one, right? But it's basically from this to this, right? Much better. Now, of course, this is too much, and that's why we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty of all these settings of the ZRmesher to get something better out of it. So I'm just gonna undo that, and I'm gonna explain some of the things that you can do with these settings. But before I do that, I'm going to go to the geometry palette. I'm going to show you where all of these things are in case you want to explore other tools that are, like I said, more advanced or more specific. Here in the ZRmesher subtab under the geometry subpalette, these are all the elements that you can play around with the ZRmesher. Now, the ZRmesher has this switch called the Legacy 2018. In 2018, or for ZRush 2019, actually, I believe it was, it would make sense. The ZRmesher algorithm that is being used was updated to take into account more of a hard surface modeling tips. Again, this is something more advanced, but it's good for you to know. So if this ZRmesher button doesn't give you a great result for organic shapes, you can enable this switch and then run the ZRmesher process, and it's going to give you a slightly different mesh. Okay, so that's what this does. Again, it's not something that I use all the time, so that's why I don't put it in the UI. But just so you know, if you have this option to use the legacy version, which might give you better results for organic stuff. We might use it, we might not. We'll see how we go. Then we have the freeze borders, freeze groups. That is basically if you have polygroups. Just to give you an example, if I just assign a polygroup there, right? If I select these freeze groups and I do a ZRmesher, this is not going to look great, but it's trying to keep, like I said, this is not going to look great at all, but it's trying to keep the line of the polygroups because it's freezing the borders. Right, so let me undo that. Basically, it's taking all of these points that are along the border and it's freezing the groups so that everything else can change except this line here. So again, this is not probably the best example, but that's what this does. I can also freeze border, so the borders all around. So as you can see, it has this weird topology because it tried to freeze the exact border that it has in the outside and just figure out a topology for the inside. That's why you have extra weird topology to try to match the points on the edges. Okay, so it might be useful, but it's not something that I would use all the time. Again, it's kind of like more advanced for more specific workflows, so that's why it's not here. Let me undo that. Then you can have the keep groups, and when you enable keep groups, which is something that I do use quite a bit, and I'll show you a really cool technique in a couple of videos, you have these smooth groups, right? And the smooth groups is the equivalent to use in the deformation palette the polish by groups. So if you use this polish by groups, you're gonna get this more clean line between the groups, right? Whereas with these smooth groups, it's going to do that when you click ZRmesher. So you don't have to do it manually. So this helps you to skip a step. So let me undo that. So basically, if you keep groups, so ZR is gonna keep these two groups, the green one and the pink one, and the smooth groups is going to smooth this to get a cleaner line before the ZRmesher is applied, right? So I'll show you the difference. So with smooth groups at 0 and you do ZRmesher, we get this type of thing, which is pretty decent, right? Given that the topology that we had was horrible, but ZRush kept the polygroups, the different groups, and it just created the topology around it, right? And that is with 0. If I undo that, let's set the smooth groups at 1. It's the same thing that I have here in the UI. So ZRush is going to apply the same idea of these polish by groups, but in one single click. So at 1, click ZRmesher, and now we have a very clean topology around the edge that we can obviously go ahead and smooth even more to get something very, very clean, right? So this is very helpful, and I'll show you how to use that in a few videos. I just want to give you a sense of what these tools are and what they do. Other than this, I have the target poly count in the UI as well, and this one is pretty useful because it allows you to set a target amount of polygons, and this value here, number 5, is done in the thousands. So right now the target poly count is 5,000, right? So if I set this to, let's say, 1, right, 1,000, we're gonna get a lot less polygons. So I'm gonna click on ZRmesh, and now we have a lot less polygons. So now we have 1,000 polygons, and you can keep doing this, right? So I just undo that. I can do that, let's say 0.1, that's 100 polygons, right? ZRmesher, and we have a very clean topology. These points right here might be something that we can fix, but I will show you a few techniques as well. So I just want to mention that this is why I keep all of these tools in the UI, but you have some more advanced things that you can play around with. But these ones are the ones that I reckon are going to be essential to get a good polish and good topology. So let me undo that, right? I'm going to set this to what it was, 5,000. The default, and I'm going to close this because I already showed you where it is, and we can work with the UI as it is. All right, so again, the whole point of this, also let me give it a polygroup as it was before. So the whole point of this lesson is to get a cleaner topology so that we can start working on details later on. So in a way, we're moving now from 3D sketching, and this is in terms of the workflow. So 3D sketching, you could do, remember, you can use something like ZRmesher, you can use Sculptris Pro, and so on and so forth. That would be the equivalent to sketching in 3D. And now we're going to move into polishing, right? And the idea with the polishing here is that we need to start working with a clean topology. So we need clean topo, as in topology. And once we have the clean topology, we can use the subdivision approach. Subdiv, okay, which is this one right here. Right, and that's going to allow us to go back and forth between, let's say, subdivision level 1 and, let's say, subdivision level 5, but the topology is going to be clean, right? So that's why we can go back and forth, all right? And that's basically the whole point of this module. Don't worry if this doesn't make too much sense right now. It's definitely going to be clearer as we progress in the module. But I just wanted to give you a sense of what we're doing in general. All right, so let's go ahead and create a clean topology for this piece. Now, before we go ahead and actually create the clean topology for this mesh, I'm going to show you a little bit of what these switches here do. They're self-explanatory, half, same, and double. It's just going to maintain. Let's say that when you do the ZRmesher, ZRmesher is going to cut the amount of polygons in half, or is going to double it, or is going to try to keep it the same amount of polygons. So these ones are pretty self-explanatory, but I want to show you what the adapt does, because it is sometimes good to turn it on and off. So I'm going to use a quick sphere here, and what I'll do is I'm going to select the damp standard brush here, and I'm going to do a couple of indentations here. Maybe subdivide this and delete the lower subdivision level, so there's no levels of subdivision. All right, so this one is just a crevice in this sphere. I'm gonna duplicate it, and I'm gonna move that out of the way so that we have two identical spheres. One, I'm going to use the ZRmesher with adapt on, and the other one I'm going to use with out. So I'm going to set the target to 1000. I'm going to enable polyframe, And I'm gonna go ahead and with this, I'm gonna use ZRmesher with adapt on. So that's gonna give me a new topology, better one, hopefully, that takes into account this indentation that we created. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing for this one, but with adapt off. So essentially with that, the adapt option does is it tries to adapt to the crevices, or where ZRush needs more polygons to describe the shape, is going to add more polygons. So I'm going to merge them together so that we can see both of the polygroups at once. So these ones are pretty similar, right? What's important is that this one has this adaptive on and this one is off. So as you can see in this one right here, ZRush is not adapting the topology. So basically the size of this polygon in this area is pretty much the same size as the polygons here, right? So it's consistent all around. Whereas in this case, we have a larger polygon here because we don't have anything special in this area to describe these crevices or anything, because this is pretty much a clean surface. But in these areas where there is a crevice or there is an indentation, we have a change in size of the polygons so that ZRush can describe that line. Of course, this one is not great. There's some weird things happening here, but those are the type of things that we're going to take care of later on. I just want to show you the difference between adapt on and off, because in some cases we might want to use the adapt on so that we have more topology or smaller pieces of geometry than in other cases. So when we do, for example, the head that has a lot of these lines in here, these indentations, adaptive on might be the best way to go about it. But when we do something like the sleeping bag, right, for the most part, this doesn't have a lot of details, the base mesh, so we can do it with the adaptive off. Again, this will make more sense when we do the practical stuff, but let's go ahead and start with that. I'm gonna go into solo mode again, and let's go ahead and turn adaptive off because there's a lot of details in here. This is a pretty clean mesh and we want to have something consistent all around. All right, so I'm not going to set a target polygon. Instead, I'm just going to click on half and click on ZRmesher. All right, now this is looking great, but it could be improved even more. But before I do that, I'm going to undo that and I'm going to show you the difference between symmetry and without symmetry, basically. So ZRmesher actually takes into account the symmetry. If you have symmetry on, like I did before, you get something pretty symmetrical with the middle line, or the line in the middle being the center line for the symmetry, right? But if I go ahead and turn off symmetry and do ZRmesher, it's gonna give us a pretty good result. Actually give us a much better result here in the corners, but there's no a center line. So just keep that in mind, that ZRmesher actually works well with symmetry. So I'm going to undo that. Enable symmetry. I have half enabled. So it's going to give me roughly half of whatever I have here. And there we go. Now, this area right here doesn't look great, these polygons here. But this is something that we can work with. We can fix it with the ZRmesher that you already know. We can delete some faces and merge things, but I'm going to show you a simpler process. So with the move brush and the AccuCurve, right, I want to make sure that these areas of these corners are very pointy. So I'm going to use the smooth brush to smooth all this. And I'm just going to use the move brush with the AccuCurve to make sure that this area is very pointy, or it has a very well-defined corner. Same thing here. So instead of this more rounded shape, I'm going to push these polygons like so to make sure it is actually a sharp edge. The other edges don't really matter, just those ones here, and just to smooth this area that is giving me weird results. All right, this is a pretty simple topology, but I'm happy that this is giving me these results so that I can show you this process even in this very simple mesh. So now let's go ahead and click on ZRmesher again. Still have, so I'm gonna click ZRmesher, and there we go. So now we have a super clean topology. We can even use the smooth brush to clean it even more. But as you can see, it sort of kept those corners of the mesh, which is super handy. All right, so I think this one is already pretty clean. You can keep doing the ZRmesher and half the amount of polygons. So if I click on ZRmesher again, it's going to give me half of those polygons. And then you start to get into this more refined mesh, but I think this one is pretty good. Okay, let's see. Actually, let's move this vertex here just so that we can arrange them a little bit better. And what we have now is a pretty clean mesh. All right, so if I get out of solo mode, we have a very nice piece of geometry out of the sketch or the single-sided mesh or sketch that we created before, and use the subdivision approach to add details and so on and so forth. All right, so let's go ahead and repeat the process for the backs. So this area here, which should be pretty much the same, and should give us a pretty decent result, or similar result to whatever we did before. So let's go ahead and turn off adaptive, set it to half, make sure symmetry is enabled, ZRmesher, and this is just a recap of the process. All right, so I created a weird mesh in here, or a weird point, but again, that's just a matter of taking the time of smoothing certain areas and do another ZRmesher. There we go, and same thing here. We can do another half, or remeasure by half again. And there we go. So pretty similar stuff to the one we did before. Of course, in some cases, we just need to go in and manually rearrange some of the polygons or use the polish features. We can actually use the polish by feature to relax all of this, but we're going to lose a bit of the corners. So that's why I like to keep this process a bit more manual. All right, pretty good. Let's go ahead and get out of solo mode to see how this is impacting the rest of the mesh. Obviously, once you do the ZRmesher, the amount of polygons will change. Try to keep the same, Zero is going to try to keep the same volume, but things are going to change since there is less geometry to describe those volumes. So I'm just going to push things a little bit. Again, this is part of the adjustment stage that we would do after, if anything, but just wanted to have something clean from the beginning. All right, so we have cleaned this one and this one. That's pretty good. Let's do another recap for this one. So I'm going to go into solo mode, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off adaptive, have on, and ZRmesher. Okay, now something happened here that gave us a weird result in this case. So what I'm going to do is remove half, and I'm going to get something working that is a little bit better with just the ZRmesher without telling ZRush to reduce the amount. So now we have something that is, again, super clean. And now that we have this, it's going to be much easier for ZRush to remesh this mesh, right? So I'm going to enable half and click on ZRmesher. And now we have something super easy to work with and very, very clean. Let's go ahead and see how it looks. I think this one is pretty decent, this amount of polygons, so I'm going to leave it as it is. You can go ahead and keep reducing it, but I think this one is a pretty decent result for the ZRmesher, so I'm going to keep it there. All right, and to wrap up this video, let's go ahead and do another recap of this process with the shared. So I'm going to select the shared, go into solo mode, and let's go ahead and do a quick ZRmesher. Pretty much following the same process that I did before. So half off, adaptive off, ZRmesher, and there we go. So we have something going that is pretty good. I mean, we still have those star points there, but we're gonna work with that. So let's go ahead and enable half to simplify it, and keep pressing ZRmesher with the half on. So the more that you press the ZRmesher, the less polygons you're gonna end up with. One more time. All right, so this one is pretty low. Let's go ahead and undo that, because I still wanna remove these vertices here. So I'm gonna go back quite a bit, and I'm just gonna make sure that I smooth these areas. I'm gonna do it without the polyframe, so you can see this is very smooth. And let's do it again. So ZRmesher half, and it's still giving me this. So what I'm going to do now is undo that and try it to do it with the adaptive. So see what that gives us. So whenever you get something that is not necessarily what you want, you can try adaptive and see if that gives you a better result. All right, so now the end result is different. It's still not the ideal one, but it's different. Now this one is much better. Okay, so you see a much cleaner topology, and that is just playing with adaptive on or off, and of course reducing the amount of polygons we'd have. But this one all around gives us a pretty decent topology. Okay, there's some points in here that you won't even see because it's going to be covered, but it gives us a pretty decent result. Now it's all a matter of going with the move brush, and with the AccuCurve if you want, symmetry enable and adjust the shapes a tiny bit. But I think for the most part, it did a pretty decent job as keeping the volume. So this is the area that we want to concentrate on maybe a little bit more, because remember that's the one that is creating the effect of compression. All right, let me just check the arms, making sure they're not intersecting anything. Great. So now we have a pretty decent topology for the shirt as well. And we've covered the introduction to the ZRmesher. So we have 1, 2, and 3, and 4 pieces that have been ZRmeshed, and we have pretty much everything that we need to move forward and start cleaning the mesh. Now, right now, this looks pretty blocky, right? But remember that we have access to dynamic subdivision, which is just a preview. So I can enable dynamic at subdivision level 2, turn off polyframe, and we get pretty much the same result, since it's just a clean topology with a dynamic subdivision preview. So I'm going to do the same thing for all of this. There we go. So we have an idea of what the result of these meshes would be once we do the subdivision, right? So of course there's some intersection, but in this case, I'm just going to push this forward a tiny bit. There we go. Some intersection, there's a little bit of shrinkage, but we're going to get to that when we get to the adjusting. So that covers the introduction to the ZRmesher. So again, to wrap up this video, I'm just going to show you why I added this in the new UI. And this is just a process that I found to be really helpful, and it's just a personal preference. You don't have to follow it, and it doesn't affect the outcome. It doesn't affect the workflow at all. This is just a little tip that I want to give you in case you find it useful and you can incorporate it into your own workflow. But again, it's not essential. What I like to do is select the meshes that are ready, or that I find that are ready to move on to the next stage, which is polishing, and assign a color. So I generally speaking add a blue color, and I can concentrate on the ones that are not ready. So the way that this works is super simple. That's why I kept these new elements of the UI very simple, and we're gonna get into way more depth when we get to the polypaint stage. But for now, all we need to know is that this RGB is enabled, which enables the color in whatever object you have selected. And this is how you change the color. So as you see, we have no polypaint right now. This is a mesh that has no color. So every time that I change the color, it's going to change with it. All right. So what I like to do is select a light blue color, something like this, right? As an indication that whatever is blue is ready to start detailing. Okay. So as you can see, as soon as I select a color here, it's going to be selected here in the main color. So this is the current color that I have selected, and I have this mesh selected. So if I go into solo mode, this is the mesh that I have selected. I'm going to go ahead and click Fill Object. So nothing seemed to happen because, again, nothing had polypaint, and we sort of like covering it with the same color, everything. But as soon as I change the color back to white, you'll see that this mesh that is ready, because the topology is looking good, is blue. Okay, and again, this is something that doesn't affect the outcome, it doesn't affect the workflow, but it's a nice visual reminder of the meshes that are ready to move forward. All right, so I'm going to select the meshes that have a nice topology, and I'm going to assign the same color. So to assign the same color, once you have selected, you can click here anywhere and drag without letting go of the click. Just drag all the way to the blue color that you have selected, and you'll see it is being selected. All right. Again, I'm going to show you this in more depth when we get to polypaint, but just so you know, this is the way that you select colors in ZRmesher. Click and drag all the way to the one that you want to select. Now I'm going to select with alt click this other piece, click Fill Object, this piece, Fill Object, and the shirt, Fill Object. All right. So these are the ones that we did in here, right? But then we have other pieces that are also pretty decent in topology that we can also tag with this color. Like I said, this handbag at the beginning of this lesson is also pretty decent and pretty ready to go. All I want to do is add a couple of polygons. So what I'm going to do now is add some loops just to clean up this topology, and I'm going to jump into a time lapse because this is something that we already discussed, and you can just see me doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and select the C modeler, right click on the edge, make sure I have insert on, and I'm going to jump into the time lapse, and I'm going to select other pieces that are ready to go and clean them up a little bit. Okay, so I'll see you in a second. right, that was faster than what I thought. So we have a pretty clean topology for some of these meshes. So what I'm going to do now is select the ones that I know they're ready. And I'm going to go ahead and select the blue color. And right now I have the belt selected. So I'm going to click Fill Object. Then I'm going to select the straps, Alt-click to select that. I'm also selecting the move row just in case, because I had the C modular selected. I don't want to mess around with topology. So Alt-click, Fill Object. I'm also doing the same thing for the straps, Fill Object. Same thing for the bag, Fill Object. Same thing here for the straps here, Fill Object. And for the medallion as well. And this buckle area as well, Fill Object. All right, so now if I go back to a white color, everything that is blue is a clean topology that we can approach it with the subdivision approach. The rest of the meshes that are still in gray, they're pretty much sketches. So if I select the head and go into polyframe, right, we have a topology that is not very clean. So this is a more advanced retopology, but we're going to get to that. I just want to keep it simple for this introduction to ZRmesher so that you can practice and play around with these settings for simpler or slightly simpler topology or slightly simpler meshes, right? Than before we get into the head and the shaft and all that. All right, so I'm going to leave this lesson here, and in the next video, I'm going to show you another technique also using the ZRmesher for slightly more complex objects. All right, so I'll see you there.